guys from worldut.com. We have a very special guest today, Patrick Novecosky, who is here from Nova Media and from CatholicPublicist.com. We're going to talk about one of our favorite saints, St. John Paul II. How did you come to know St. John Paul II as a young person?
That's an interesting story. I grew up in Canada, and John Paul was the first, and to this date, the only Pope to ever visit Canada. So when I was 16, the Holy Father came to Canada. He toured the country. He was there for almost like 10 days and stopped in virtually every province except Saskatchewan, where I grew up. But we had some church ladies from, I was 16, by the way, in 1984. We had some church ladies come from our area going to Winnipeg to see the Pope, about a 500-mile drive. And I could have gone with them, but I don't even remember 84, like who remembers what they did in 84. I didn't go with them. But right around the time that he was visiting my area, I had this really profound dream. Now, before I tell you what the dream is, I have to tell the backstory. I was an average Catholic kid. I got into fights at school. I didn't swear very much, but I went to church on Sunday, went to confession once every 6-8 weeks, went through the sacraments, but I didn't have a relationship with the Lord. I was not a diehard faithful Catholic, which I'm trying to be today. But I was just an average kid in the pew in 1984. So John Paul's in the news. It's John Paul all the time. There are people in the streets selling Pope soap on a rope. That's the thing I remember from that. It was like a figure of John Paul II on a rope, made out of soap, and it was the Pope soap on a rope. And all this stuff is in the news. It's going on. So I had him on the brain, right? So this one night, I woke up from this really profound dream. John Paul came to my house. He was in my room and he gave me a hug. And to this day, we all have these dreams that are so vivid, that we wake up and we swear that they were real, but we know that they weren't. So I wake up from this dream, and to this day, I know what it feels like to hug John Paul II because I did. And so that kind of began my John Paul II journey. So I grew up, I studied journalism, been working in the Catholic Church ever since I finished college in 1992 as either a journalist or a publicist or a writer or an editor, video producer, the whole thing. 1997, I had the chance to go to Rome, and I was working for the Marian Fathers, the Marians of the Immaculate Conception on Eden Hill in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And this is a Polish-Lithuanian order of priests. And at the time, their superior general had been a professor at Catholic University of Lublin in Poland with Karol Wojtyła before he became a bishop. And so they went back 50 years with John Paul II. So I'm going to Rome, and my boss says, well, since you're there, would you like to meet the Pope? And I said, do you need to ask? Really? If there's a list, could you put me on that? No problem. So yeah, I got to meet John Paul II. And interesting since we're talking about saints, let me tell you this. I had a great devotion to Saint Therese, still do. And when she was 15, 16, she went to Rome and she met the Pope. So I'm in Rome. I'm asking for Therese's intercession because she had the privilege of meeting the Holy Father when she was a young person. And so I asked her if she could put in a good word for me. So it's the end of September 1997. And how it worked was that if the Pope celebrated his private mass in his private chapel in the papal apartments every morning, and if you were a priest or a bishop that was in Rome and wanted to celebrate with the Pope in his little chapel, you reserve in advance. And if there's a seat left over and you're a lay person and you're on the list, then they'll call you the night before, right? So so every night I'm in Rome, I'm going back to the Marian's house. I'm asking, so did they call? And it was always no. And so it was September 30th, 1997. My brother was with me. We wandered into St. John Lateran, and there are pictures of Therese everywhere, all in Italian, which at the time I couldn't read or translate or even figure out what they were saying. and TV cameras. And I thought, well, her feast day is tomorrow, so that might be why. So I said a prayer. I put in a good word for me with the Lord so I could meet the Pope. And we got back to the monastery, and the nun came looking for us. She said, they called, you're going to see the Holy Father tomorrow. And I said, you? Like both of us? She said, yeah, they asked how many. I said, 2. So you're both going. So my brother got to meet the Pope with me on October 1st, which happens to be Teresa's feast day. But one thing I found out about 2 weeks later is that the day the prayer was answered, September 30th, 1997, was the centenary of her death.
Right.
She died September 30th, 1897. So she answered that prayer on the centenary of her entry into heaven.
So now you go to the chapel and you're there at the private mass.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because I remember when I did it in the year 2000, very similar story. But what was it like for you being at mass with the Holy Father in the year of Jesus Christ, which was one of the 3 years in preparation for the great Jubilee year, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like being in that chapel on the feast of Saint Therese?
Yeah, I have to tell you that okay, so we went up, we went to the Porto Bronzo, which you probably know well.
At 5 in the morning, right? Very early.
Yeah. Yeah, and we got signed in, and then we got led up to a piazza, and then up another flight of stairs, and then we opened the door to the papal apartments, and there's Monsignor Jewish, now Cardinal Jewish, greeting us and telling us to leave our backpacks right here. You can't take those into the chapel with the Holy Father. And we were led through this room and around a corner, and boom, there's John Paul II kneeling in prayer in his private chapel, which I knew well from pictures, but I'm seeing the man, and he's like 15, 20 feet from me, and with lights. I mean, he glowed, and I don't know if it was the lighting or if it was just his sanctity, but my heart literally jumped in my chest the first time I saw him with my own eyes. It was a physical experience for me. So they gave us our seats, and they vested him right there in front of us, and the mass began. He didn't celebrate the homily. He didn't preach a homily. He didn't distribute communion, but I received communion that he consecrated from his own hands, which was incredibly special. The whole mass is like 20 minutes, and I'm staring at him, just trying to absorb every single detail, every nuance, everything. And it was beautiful. And then the photographer steps out and takes a picture from behind just the side of the chapel. And of course, I'm like, I'm not pointing at myself, but I made sure I was in that picture. So, but it was beautiful experience. And then they let us out into the adjoining room, and there were about 30 people, and I was the only one that had a gift for him. I actually was presenting him with pages from Marian.org. I was the webmaster at the time. Pages on Divine Mercy, on then Blessed Faustina, and Divas in Misericordia, his great encyclical on Divine Mercy. And I'm there, I'm waiting. I've got this leather folder with his gold embossed folder that we had made for my presentation. And I'm thinking in my head, what am I going to say? The Pope's going to come through that door in 30 seconds. And I was a little nervous, but he comes through the door, and all that anxiety just left. It was like it escaped out the window when he walked in. And it was like standing there talking to my dad. It was that easy, that peaceful. And so I'm standing beside the Vicar of Christ, that I think the most consequential Pope of the last 500 years, if not the last 1,000 years, and he's listening to me. That's incredibly humbling. And he said, thank you. He pressed a rosary in my hand and went to the next person. I mean, he was out of the room in 5 minutes. But he didn't engage. People say, well, what did you have a conversation? Like, no, I mean, if he had a conversation with each person, he'd be there for 2 hours.
Right.
Yeah. So he just kept it quick. He said, thank you. He blessed each of us. And my brother was introduced as being from Canada. And the Pope goes, oh, Canada. But he didn't finish the song.
So you thought he was going to do the whole anthem?
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, man, keep going.
My home and native land, right?
My home and it's a little joke, but he did say that. He did say, oh, Canada. Yeah. It was beautiful.
Do you still have the rosary?
I do have the rosary. And then,
Awesome.
so the thing is that I was in Rome, and the Marians sent me through Eastern Europe because John Paul said, Marian fathers, I want you to lead the re-evangelization of Eastern Europe. They had Marian priests behind the Iron Curtain for the whole communist era.
Yeah.
And my job was to go and gather those stories and come back and tell them in the Marian Helper magazine. And I did. They were incredibly successful. They raised tons of money for their novitiate and their seminary and rebuilding their facilities in Eastern Europe. So in '98, they sent me back to Rome, met the Pope again, went back to Eastern Europe, told more stories. '99, I saw John Paul, actually traveled with him in Poland during his Polish pilgrimage in '99, and got very close to him, didn't meet him that year, but then went back in 2000 for Faustina's canonization.
Right.
Was there in the square when he said in Italian, henceforth the second Sunday of Easter shall be known as Divine Mercy Sunday. The place just went nuts. And I'm there up on the colonnade looking down, and everybody's cheering, and I didn't know Italian. I didn't know what he said. And so I had to ask a bunch of people, like, something really big just happened. What was it? And that was it. I mean, he declared Mercy Sunday was official because Faustina was now a saint, right? So we can fulfill our Lord's demand of her that this be fulfilled because she's a saint.
Well, I really want to focus on some of those great loves. So Divine Mercy, absolutely one of his great loves that he's had. I mean, obviously, it's Saint Faustina being Polish, and then he having this connection with his spiritual mother, Our Lady of Czestochowa, right? In Gajna Gora, which I hope I'm not butchering it for anybody who's Polish. I am sorry. Jasna Gora, I think it's pronounced. But, you know, I'm thinking to myself, like, let's get into the family first.
Yeah.
You're a family man. You know, you got a beautiful family. How powerful was John Paul II in his reach to the family? I mean, obviously, let's look at his family, right? His father and mother raised two sons in a very difficult time in Poland, right? It was like right after the First World War. And here's, you know, there's his older brother, Edmund, and then he has himself, Carol, right in the midst of that. Mother dies when he's very young.
Yeah, 8, 9 years old.
That just had to have been so hard.
Yeah, it was devastating. I mean, he was very close to his mother, and she died. He was very close to his older brother, and his brother Edmund was a physician. He died during a scarlet fever outbreak when he was, I think, Karol Wojtyła would have been a young teenager when his brother died. His brother was 26, 27 years old. He graduates high school. They moved to Krakow. And then his father dies when he was like 21, 22 years old. So yeah, he understood the value of family, and he called it the domestic church. And he said, this is where we learn to relate to human beings, where we learn our faith, where we need to be formed to be good members of society. But it's the domestic church. Most importantly, this is the building block, not only of society, but the building block of the church itself. This is where vocations are born. This is where sanctity is formed. And we understand the relationship between mother, father, and children as a kind of a mirror, in a sense, of the Holy Trinity. And the importance of that, he unpacked that in a beautiful way. And me, being just a simple writer, can kind of get a sense of it and communicate that in a very simple way. But he really went into depth on the family, the necessity of the family, having an integrated family. And you know, what I just did this short little 3-minute audio podcast for one of my friends' programs a couple of days ago, and talking about how in the family, when one person is wounded, we kind of have to be like soldiers on a battlefield. You know, you've got a family member who's wounded, either physically, emotionally, spiritually. You get under that person, you lift them up, and you move them forward. You don't leave them behind. That it's our job to support each other in the family first, because we're a unit. We're kind of like a platoon fighting a war, and in this case, I guess a cultural war, a spiritual war. But we need to be united. We need to be together. We need to be in lockstep, kind of supporting one another first, but moving forward to be an example to the world, to kind of show the world what it means to be a father, to be a husband, to be a child of God, and particularly for fathers to be the role model, to be the head, to be the complementary, have the complementary relationship with your wife, and be a unit to kind of model sanctity for the world, not only for the children but for the world.
Yeah, we'll you know what we'll do is we'll take that podcast you made and we'll link it up to the bottom of the description for this video. Good. And one of the things that struck me what you just said is I go back to thinking about, Carl Wojtyła was a young teenager. At nighttime, he would hear his father making noises in his bedroom, and he would wonder what's going on. And as he opened the door to his father's bedroom, which was very, very, very simple, a little twin bed, right? He would see his father on his knees praying.
Yep, at all hours of the night. And how are saints born? They always have a role model, a mentor. And for John Paul II, it was his father, Karol Wojtyła Sr., whose cause for canonization is now open, which is beautiful. I love to have two St. Karol Wojtyłas, right?
Well, be careful. One would be John Paul, because he did take a new name.
Sure.
Pope, right?
But still.
Yeah,
so absolutely. I mean, his John Paul's prayer life was, I refer to it as like kind of a nuclear reactor, because it powered everything that he did. Everything that he did was born in prayer. And how did he learn to pray? From his dad. He would see his dad kneeling in prayer at his bedside all hours of the night, and whether he heard him or not, I mean, he did, but at times he just probably got up to go to the bathroom, and there's a light on, he peeks, and it's his dad kneeling in the middle of the night in prayer, and numerous other things. I mean, his father introduced him to Our Lady of Jasna Gora, to the Black Madonna in Czestochowa, and his mother died, so his dad says, well, now she is your mother. And all Poles, I mean, Polish people, I mean, the Jasna Gora, the Black Madonna, that is their great devotion. He went there for the first time as Pope, and he said, how many times have I come here and poured out my heart to you and said, totus tuus, I am all yours. That's where he got the motto from, in prayer in front of the icon. And so interestingly about his motto, totus tuus, and that's his Marian consecration, which he got from St. Louis de Montfort. But he took that motto when he was made a bishop. So his coat of arms, his motto, that's from he was, I think, 1962. Right. When he made a bishop. Right as the Iron Curtain. Take that back. 1958. So I was going to say, right as the Iron Curtain became what it is with communism, because he became a bishop in 58,
and he was shocked. I mean, he didn't expect that to come either.
Yeah,
I mean, ideally, like, a young priest who's hanging out with families, and this is where you mentioned really carefully like how important Mother Mary was to him, right? That figure of beautiful femininity, and then the masculinity. His model and example was his father. And yet when he starts working as a parish priest, he is immediately drawn to the family and to young people to bring the gospel message out to that. And then from there, when he's made bishop, I can't even imagine what must have been going through his mind, thinking, we're in a dark period in our history now in Poland. You have communism that is now becoming even stronger, right? It was at the dawn of the Iron Curtain in the late 50s and early 60s. It literally came crashing in his face. And as bishop, he's not favorably looked. I mean, I remember visiting Krakow and seeing the bishop's house, where eventually he was made cardinal of Krakow, right? Archbishop of Krakow. And I was hearing stories of how they literally were they were tapping into him. They were listening to everything he's saying, because they were worried that these priests, these bishops, would force a change to happen with the people. And yet, it was never John Paul II himself. It was him pointing at the most important thing that really brings culture and life together, which is our Blessed Lord and our beautiful image of Our Lady.
Exactly.
Poland was destroyed by the Nazis and just completely cowering to the communists. And they're like, it's going to erase them all from history. And I think to myself, like, we see that even happening in the world today where ideologies are doing that to our faith. And yet here comes a young bishop, and very young for his age at the time, right? I mean,
he was 38.
Yeah.
He was 38. Yep.
And we've seen younger in the history of the church, but in the modern time, unheard of. And yet, I think it's definitely interesting how Pius XII, must have seen something in him, and how John the 23rd also, and how John Paul, before John Paul I, before Paul VI, even when he gets the red hat, must have known,
right.
He must have known something in him that this man is destined. I mean, eventually, when he gets to the Second Vatican Council, people are like, "Wow, his contribution is huge!" Right? Here we are in the 60s. He's only Bishop Wojtyła. He wrote a book called Love and Responsibility, which I know you and I have both read.
1960.
About the family, yeah.
Yep.
And that becomes the focal point of his. On top of that, besides the Totus Tuus motto, that also becomes the focal point of his papacy. The first, I think it was from 1979 or 1980 to 79, 80 to 83. His catechesis turns on the family, and he starts talking about theology of the body. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so he wrote this book called Love and Responsibility in 1960, and it was about family, it was about human sexuality, it was about right relationships, it was about male and female, he created them, and what does that mean? And it was groundbreaking in a sense that it really was, here's a bishop writing about human sexuality, unashamed, unabashed, just here it is, this is the reality. And it was at a point where, we're in the age of Kinsey, right? And the sexual revolution is about to break. He was before the sexual revolution really kind of flowered in the United States.
And before Humanae Vitae, right?
Before
Humanae wasn't even a document yet.
Right. This is 8 years before Humanae Vitae, right? And it really, it was influential, particularly in Poland, but for the copies that were outside of Poland, absolutely. And it did have some influence, from what I understand, on Humanae Vitae, as did Karol Wojtyła in giving his input to the Holy Father. But it really laid the groundwork for the theology of the body, which was John Paul's very first major teaching of his pontificate from like 78 to 82, like 300 series of a few hundred lectures on human sexuality, the human person, and what does it mean to be male and female? Does it even matter? That basically saying that the human body, the way it's built, answers all of those questions. And he unpacked that in a sort of complex way. In a very detailed way. But the simplicity of it too is beautiful. There's a theology of the body. You can either you can look at it as simple teaching, or if you really want to break it open, it's massively complex and very deep, and it takes years to kind of figure out the nuances of it. So fantastic document, which, like we were saying, kind of grew out of the Love and Responsibility book.
The thing that struck me the most is when it wasn't until I got married until I realized how profound, how prophetic, and how strong that book was to my life. Because as kids started coming into the picture, I started thinking to myself, going back to theology of the body, wow, I am now becoming a co-creator with God, sharing in the life of the Trinity, building the domestic church. That's life of sacrifice, where we really don't take it to heart when we really begin to, when we hear the reading from Ephesians, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church.
Right.
And people read it and it's like, wow, that's all about, the patriarchy slamming down the image of femininity. But then here comes John Paul II saying, no, it is the complementarity of the love of spouses that share in the divine nature of God's creation. And then we continually build on that, that aspect of that gift of that life that we bear. One of the reasons why, even in Veritatis Splendor, his document on morality, he focuses on the issues, what is at hand with moral issues. And then he writes the big, beautiful document called the Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, and there he begins to like connect the dots. I remember studying this when I was a student in, doing theology at college, thinking to myself, going, man, doesn't anybody see that he's literally been dotting the path of the church, realigning it back to the most important element, which was the family life, restructuring the beauty of the family life. And of course, the family's always been under attack. But here's the beauty of John Paul II's greatest gift, to say it all begins with the family, and how in the family, if we all go to the Blessed Sacrament, moving our direction, gazing our direction towards our blessed Lord himself, it is there that we will find our peace. It is there that we will find our purpose. It is there that we'll find our mission. It is there that will make you saints, which brings me to the next point that I want to share with you, which is World Youth Day.
Right.
He starts with the family, and then he goes right to the heart of what does the family struggle with more than anything, is raising children, right? I mean,
teenagers,
especially teenagers and young adults, right?
So I have three teenagers in my house. And what I've come to realize is God gave parents the teenage brain in order to save them from purgatory. If you can parent teenagers, that takes significant time off purgatory, man. I'm convinced of it.
My oldest is only 9, so I'm praying to God that I have the wisdom, the courage, and thanks be to God through the sacraments, particularly confirmation, that equipped me to be the man that I am today.
Yes.
Also, the Sacrament of Reconciliation, asking the Lord for mercy. I'm not perfect in my patient side. I got that sanguine blood in me. So it's always okay, Lord, let's, when she becomes a teenager, let me be that saintly father that I can be, so I can raise a saintly daughter. It's hard, man. It's hard.
But it's worth it. Hard, but worth it, right?
It's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. I wouldn't give up anything in the world. I wouldn't regret ever being a father, because the vocation of parenthood is equally as difficult as the vocation of a priest. And I love when people are like, no, it's the same. It actually, you have no idea. Being married is so much easier because you don't have to worry about celibacy. Like, no, you don't get it. Like, not only is it about my own sanctity, but now I have to raise my bride to sanctity. Now I have to raise my children to sanctity. I'm last. And I can't do that. I sometimes have like, but I want this, I want that. No, you have to be willing to die to yourself every single day. Yes, a priest maybe might have it a little bit easier to deal with, because he does not have just one family that he deals with all the time, right? Because he can move every 6 years or every 12 years from parish to parish and deal with all sorts of families. You don't get to move. Like, you're with that spouse, you're with your children till death do you part, right? I mean, that's the vocation of marriage. There's nothing in this world that can dissolve a valid marriage but natural death. But let's make that clear. Like, it's tough. Marriage is tough. But that's why John Paul II knew that the focus needed to be on marriage. And then when he turned to World Youth Day, in 1983, he wrote a document called Dilecti Amici, which he writes to young people. And he uses this beautiful parable, well, not really a parable, but a story about the rich young man who shows up to him and says, Lord, what must I do to gain eternal life? And our blessed Lord tells him, give up everything you have and follow me. And right after he explains to him, did you follow the commandments? Yes. Did you do this? Yes. I'm ready. No, you're not. You have to give up everything you have. And he had a hard time doing that because he was so attached to his material possessions. And then he calls young people together. And I think it started in Rome. It wasn't even that popular. He then moves it to, Our Lady of Czestochowa. Wasn't that popular. Then he moves it to Buenos Aires. Then it begins to gain momentum.
Right. And he had a meeting of youth in Paris, and that was early 80s, and that went well. That's kind of where the idea for World Youth Day was born, right? I mean, you're in this movement, and then Rome, and then with each successive meeting, World Youth Day World Youth Day meeting with young people, it grew, and Manila drew the largest gathering in human history, over 7-8 million people. To see the Holy Father, which is...
And that's only live. That's not even those who were watching on TV.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no question. That was live
Yeah,
audience.
live
Amazing.
audience. And I remember in Denver in 1993, all the journalists were just telling him left and right, who's going to come? Like, no
Yeah.
one's interested in what you have to say.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself going, how dare you? Like, do you realize, like, here's a man of wisdom who is sharing not himself. It's not about what
Yeah.
he had to say. He was reflecting the love of Christ to young people, and they came. They
And
came
here,
in great numbers.
here's an interesting point, though. When he came to the United States in 79 and 83, he got a rock star reception.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
New
absolutely.
York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Phoenix,
And
everywhere,
LA.
St.
Yeah.
Louis, LA. And so, I mean, it was obvious, this should have been obvious to the media that people love this guy. So why would they think in 93 that he comes to Denver and it's going to be a flop? I mean, they really weren't looking at his reception and his previous visits to the United States. Had they done that, they might not have been so critical, but he completely proved them wrong. I mean, it was massively successful, not only at that World Youth Day, but the fruit that it bore and continues to bear through groups like the Augustine Institute and Focus and Endow, all these beautiful apostolates right in Denver that are doing amazing things and will continue to do amazing things.
And think of how many vocations were born from that event. And I meet priests all the time that have said, I became a priest because I was in Denver, or I became a religious sister because I was in Denver, or because I attended a World Youth Day. I mean, people don't realize what he started was a ripple effect. Like, he threw a pebble, and I don't even want to say a boulder. He threw a pebble in the water, and now the ripple effect has literally, gone from one small little area to the world. And I remember every World Youth Day, and my first one was in Paris in '97, and I thought to myself, wow, what an amazing event. And I don't think anybody was, looked at each other and said, we're here because of John Paul II.
Right.
We knew that we were here looking for meaning and purpose in our life. And the words that he was going to share with us was going to provide us a sense of direction, a sense of realignment to the source and the summit of our faith. And that celebration of that Eucharist, at that final Mass on Sunday, I realized for me, it was to be a saint in the world. I remember, as a young boy reading Saint Jose Maria Escriva, talking about a saint is a sinner who keeps trying. All of us are called to be saints. And I remember one of the great quotes from, Paris that I got from one of the many people that were repeating what John Paul II said: don't be afraid to be saints. How many times has he said the word "don't be afraid"? Or how many times has he used the word coraggio, courage, right? Have the courage to be saints. And then we move to the Jubilee year, and seeing him frail in Parkinson's. I mean, nobody had a dry eye, tears in the eyes at World Youth Day in Rome because of his aching pain. And, he was holding a cane. But when the young people started singing "Jesus Christ, You Are My Life," which is the song that started basically at World Youth Day, right? Started taking his cane and waving it like a typical grandfatherly figure. I thought to myself, like, where does he get the energy and the strength to do all these things?
I know, right?
Because, he's literally was a candle slowly fading away, which brings me to the year 2005, which, it was by far one of the hardest years for me, having a love of seeing this guy as a grandfatherly figure, right? And then I remember April 1st, the media started saying, John Paul II turned, he had his medical condition turned for the worse. He has now not only is he having a breathing tube in his neck, but, he no longer can speak publicly and, pray for him. And then that night, people were saying, we don't know how long he's going to last. And then came that fateful April 2nd in the afternoon where, the announcement came that he had passed away. Do you remember where you were? Because I know people always say, like, John F. Kennedy, when he was assassinated, where were you? People remember everything that went on during that time. where were you when the Challenger exploded, right? What were you doing during that time? 2005, April 2nd. Do you remember what you were doing?
Yeah, well, about that moment, it was the Vigil of Divine Mercy,
Right.
and a Saturday night, and Bishop Jeevish celebrating Mass in front of John Paul II. He has I think a little bit of the precious blood, and then he dies. I mean, he literally had the Divine Mercy Mass, and then he went to his reward. I mean, what a perfect capstone to a beautiful and consequential life. I was at home with my wife and young child. My wife was about 8 months pregnant with my second child, and we were home. And I think we heard it later in the afternoon. Came home from work. I was working for Ave Maria School of Law at the time in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and heard the news on my way home from work. And I wasn't devastated. I mean, it was heartbreaking, but I knew. I mean, I think the media had prepared us for what was coming. So, and it was a similar feeling to when my father died of cancer 5 years ago. That he was suffering. We knew the end was near. He lived a beautiful life. He had a holy death. I mean, Saint Joseph, patron of holy death. I mean, my dear aunt used to pray for a holy death during our night prayers sometimes, and I'd go like, "What does that mean?" Now I know what that means, because John Paul II had a holy death. He had the perfect ending to an amazing life, and so did my father. So I didn't feel great sorrow. In a sense, it's a relief that the suffering is over, and he's going to where we're all going. We're all going to our particular judgment, and then our final judgment. And I think it's beautiful to witness a holy death, because that shows us, it gives us a template for how we should prepare to end when we end, right? But yeah, it was the end of an era, and it was the kind of a hinge point, I guess, in church history. 26 and a half years of this amazing man who was seen by more people than any human being who's ever lived. Seen live in person by more people than any human being who's ever lived.
And the most photographed man, wasn't he? He was the most photographed man in human history until I think it was the seagull that landed on top of the chimney of the Sistine Chapel when Pope Francis was elected Pope. Remember?
Yeah. Matter of fact, I was there. I was in Rome. I was at the not in the conclave, but at the conclave as a journalist when Francis was elected. So yeah, I remember that very well.
Going back to what you were mentioning about holy death, and then we'll talk about your book, because I want to respect your time as well. It's like, how John Paul II lived and died is how we should live and die.
Yeah.
In a sense, embracing human suffering. Not too many people knew the idea that his Parkinson's literally diminished his ability, and yet he never stopped continuing forward in his mission, in his vocation, not only to be the priest of all priests, but the servant of God, the servant of all servants, right? I mean, ideally, what we see in the hierarchy is not the Pope being the highest of all, but rather at the lowest of low, because he's the servant of all. The titles actually of the Pope. You want to see how he was servum fidei? Like, there, he began to be the servant. He lived the extraordinary life of suffering for the sake of the body, the church. St. Paul describes as, making up for what is suffering in the afflictions of Christ on the cross. Our Holy Father, St. John Paul II, did just that. He offered up his sufferings, he offered up prayers for all those throughout the world, embraced everyone where they were at. And that's the beauty of calling young people, calling the family together. I mean, ideally, there is no perfect model that we could have seen in our lifetime. On videos, on hearing him speak, we have countless records of information and speeches and videos recorded by St. John Paul II. And as you mentioned, the most seen man in human history at that time, right? And yet, we will probably spend lifetimes still going through the immense contributions that he made to the life of the church, but not just to the life of the church, but to the life of the family, of young people, and to focus on the most important element, which was the Eucharist. One of his last encyclicals was on the Eucharist, the heart of the church. How beautiful this man was. And, I'm always so inspired to think like, I can only imitate his holiness, in my life, in my sufferings, in my, mediocre situations. Wow. I mean, even at his final mass, the Cardinal Ratzinger celebrated his funeral mass that eventually would bury St. John Paul II. There were already signs all over the square saying Santo Subito, right? Make him a saint right away. And he became actually one of the bestest saints, along with Mother Teresa, to be declared saints. I mean, within 5 years.
Yeah.
Blessed and canonized. And here we are, right? And both of you and I both were able to be at the canonization mass. I mean, wow, right? To think like, here's the man who influenced, our vocations, not only in Mary's life, but also to be, pilgrims of truth, pilgrims of beauty and goodness, especially with what we write and say in journalism, but also in how we proclaim it in our words and actions. And yet, we have an amazing intercessor praying for everything that we do. So what was your inspiration to write this book? I mean, let's get to this book, because I know you wanted to share it earlier, and please.
Yeah.
It's a great book. And I thank you for sending me a copy. My wife bought it for me. Those of you guys that know, my wife bought it to me as a gift. Patrick signed it. It was so awesome. I'm like, I love it. And I read it in one day. It was so amazing. I couldn't put it down. It's called The 100 Ways That John Paul II Changed the World. Written by Patrick himself. Here he is, right here, right in front of you, right? And this book is found on our Sunday Visitor and on his website. But so what was the motivating factor behind this book for you?
Yeah, so I pondered for years, why did God allow me to meet this great saint 5 times? I kissed his ring 3 times, met him 2 other times outside of that, so I started giving this talk on how I met him, but there needed to be some more substance to that. So I put together what I thought were the top 10 ways he changed the world. And I've been giving this talk for 10, 15 years. And a couple of years ago, I realized that his 100th birthday was coming up in May of 2020. So I started talking to Catholic publishers about, what would make a good book on John Paul II. And I told them, this talk that I was giving, and maybe turning that into a book. And that kind of evolved into 100 ways in honor of his 100th birthday. So that's why it's 100 ways. I could have written 150 ways or 200 ways or 101 ways, 1,000 ways.
Yeah.
So I whittled it down to 100 ways that he changed the world. Everything from the saints that he canonized to World Youth Day, which you mentioned, theology of the body, his role in destroying communism in Eastern Europe, his relationship with various saints, Mother Teresa, Padre Pio, Fulton Sheen. The Fulton Sheen story is amazing. We don't have time to get into that, but so many things that he did. So that was a reason for writing it. I really felt like God gave me the opportunity to meet him those times so that I could write this book. I really think that's the fruit of the grace I had of meeting him in person 5 times.
Beautiful. I mean, it is a great book, and to put John Paul II in 100 ways that he changed the world had to have been extremely challenging. I can't even imagine, thinking like, well, these are all good. These should be in here too, but picking these out. If you had to pick your favorite quote of St. John Paul II right now, what would it be?
Yeah, that's easy. I was actually going to interject this quote when we were talking about the family earlier. He wrote, the future of humanity passes by way of the family. And you could write a book just on that quote, the depth of the thought that went into creating that quote. Essentially what he's saying is that the family is kind of where saints are made, where the mother and the father reflect the beauty of the Holy Trinity with their children. It's kind of the building block of the church, but it's also the building block of society. And that if we have disintegrated families, broken families, we have a broken society and a broken culture. And we kind of see the fruits of that in our culture today. So it's essential that we as faithful Catholics focus on having a strong marriage, a strong relationship with our spouse, and being really the model for our children, no matter what their vocation is, whether they're called to married life, they'll see how mom and dad live. They'll understand that prayer is a normal thing that families do, that holiness is something to be aspired to, and that it's not out of reach. The kids need to see that. And if we're modeling that and we're doing that well, then the future of humanity is very promising. And like I said, broken families will lead to a broken future for humanity.
That's a powerful quote. You know, my favorite one of St. John Paul II is how he just acted with young people. Stupidity is a gift from God, so one mustn't misuse it, right? One mustn't misuse it. And I always think, like, you know, is the pictures of him putting the hands to his face, you know, smiling with the kids, or at World Youth Day, smirking at them in Denver, saying, "I'll be back." You know, because everybody knew, you know, that Terminator, the movie Terminator, was a big deal back then, right? But you know, the fact that he was such a showman, you know, with his background in theater, really helped the way he reached out to young people. I mean, looking back at his life, I can see many different areas where today, almost 16 years from his death, like how influential he was. If to wrap this up, like, what would you say to a young person today who's like struggling to find someone who he can connect with as a model and example of the life of holiness? How can St. John Paul II be that model of holiness for a young person today?
Yeah, John Paul grew up in a very challenging culture. He was a young man. The world was coming out of the First World War when he was very young. Poland was impacted by the First World War. His father was actually a soldier in the First World War. And then he finishes high school, and the Second World War breaks out right in his native Poland, and joins a seminary. He's in the underground seminary, and he was really a culture warrior. I mean, if you really break down his life, he was pushing back against the culture of death that was all around him. And I think that's his greatest strength for us as a model today, is look how John Paul confronted the culture. He didn't confront it with violence. He didn't confront it with angry language. I mean, if anyone had reason to be angry, it was John Paul II. He lost his mother when he was young. His father died. His brother died. He was essentially an orphan at 21 years old. He had great tragedy in his life, but he approached tragedy as an opportunity to evangelize. And really, I said this earlier, that his prayer was kind of like a nuclear reactor, and that generated the strength and the wisdom to do everything that he did. So as a model, we need to be people of deep prayer and devotion to the sacraments, and we need to push back against the culture by living a profound life, by studying John Paul's life and looking at how he did it. I mean, he was confrontational. He was not afraid of confrontation. When they built the city, I forget the name of it, the city in Poland that was supposed to be a city without God, he put up a cross. He said, "We're building a church here." The communists tore it down. He put up another church. They celebrated Mass on the spot. The communists tore it down. He put up another cross. He was relentless. I think sometimes we feel like we have to back down from the culture. It's too strong. We don't. But we confront it with love, with truth, with justice, and by living a holy life. And honestly, without prayer, none of that is possible. It all starts with prayer. And that's how John Paul lived. And I think that's the way he can be a model for us today.
And thank God for this opportunity that we've had together here with you, Patrick. And today, you know, let's end with a prayer asking the intercessions of the great St. John Paul II. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this great gift of St. John Paul II in our lifetime. Help all those who hear this beautiful message of his story to be empowered and filled with your grace to be saints of this millennium, as our beloved St. John Paul II encouraged us to be. St. John Paul II, pray for us.
Pray
In the
for
name of
us.
the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for joining me today. How can people keep up with what you're doing, and how can they find your book?
Yeah, they can find my book. It's on Amazon. It's on our Sunday Visitor, wherever good Catholic books are sold. But you can actually order an autographed copy from my website, which is booksbypatrick.com. Keep up with me on my blog at thepraetorium.com, transferring that over to my other site pretty soon. But that's how people can stay in touch with what I'm doing. Find me on Facebook. I'm relentless on social media, particularly Facebook. So that's a good place to stay in touch too.
Oh, thank you so much, Patrick. What a joy it was to have you on the show. Please continue to pray for the World Youth Day Committee, for our Holy Father, Pope Francis, as World Youth Day Lisbon draws near in the summer of 2023. My name is Dyer from worldyouthday.com. Again, thank you, Patrick, for joining me. Please turn of our prayers for everything that you do, and keep strong during this time of pandemic. Look to the great saints to help you through it. God bless you. Thank you for joining me, and see you next time.